Hello, and welcome back to another Chris McPherson Show Daily Dose. And it's time to unpack a chaotic day on day one of the first Ashes test of the Australian home series up against England from Perth Stadium. If you're joining us for the first time and you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. We're only a couple of subscriptions away from 500, and then we're surging on towards 1,000 is the next step. We really want to take some leaps towards that by the end of the Ashes. So if you do that, that'd be wonderful. Hit the like button as well. And, of course, jump into the comments. Let us know what your thoughts are on the day's play and what is to come. Well, it certainly looked like it was a more subdued deck that had been dished up at Perth Stadium than last year, where we saw 17 wickets fall in that dramatic opening day, headlined by the one and only Jasprit Bumrah. And what a test that turned out to be. The Indians were bundled out early for not a whole lot. Australia then lost 7 wickets before the end of the day and then were bundled out early the next morning. And we thought, surely no repeat of that. England won the toss. They elected to bat, and that is where Australia named their starting 11 with 2 debutants, as we talked about in our preview yesterday, coming in, Jake Weatherald and Brendan Doggett. Weatherald to open the batting, Doggett to be one of the pace change bowlers. And it got off to a pretty ordinary start for the English. They lost a wicket in the first over. It wasn't Mitchell Starc striking with the first ball of his first over. It was the last ball of his first over. He dismissed Zach Crawley, and all of a sudden England was starting to fall. But what we ended up with was a clattering of wickets throughout the day, 19 wickets in total, the most wickets on day one of a test match in Australia in almost 74 years. That's right, going back to the 25th of January 1952, where 19 wickets fell. Australia versus the West Indies at the SCG. We've also had 19 wickets fall against South Africa on the 12th of February 1932. And on 3 occasions have there been more wickets fall on the opening day of a test on Australian soil. They're all dating well back. 1902 for 25 wickets, 1951 for 22 wickets, and way back to the 29th of December, 1894 for 20 wickets, both sides all out in the Ashes test there. Interestingly now, of those top 6 matches, 3 of them Ashes games. First, third, and equal fourth. So right up there in the history making in terms of the day that we had. But let's break that down. As we said, Mitchell Starc got things going in the first over. The English then decided to try and take on his opening partner in Scott Boland in the absence of Pat Cummins and Josh Hazlewood. And they were fairly effective in doing so. Boland was expensive in the end, but again, the Aussies looked to be on top as Starc led the way, and only 4 of the English batsmen managed to make it through into double figures. Harry Brook top scored with 52 from 61 deliveries, 5 fours, and the sole 6 of the innings. Ollie Pope was a handy addition to that run scoring as well. 46 from 58 balls, 4 boundaries, all 4s to his name. Jamie Smith, the wicketkeeper who was brought in for his counter-hitting batting, did exactly that. A lot of talk that he was behind folks as the first-choice keeper at his county, but in the test side, he stroked at 150, 33 from 22 balls, including 6 fours. So quite a significant majority, more than 67% of his runs, almost 70% of his runs came from boundaries. So Smith doing a great job. And the opener, Ben Duckett, again, better than a runner ball, 21 from 20 deliveries, 4 boundaries for him. It was an interesting innings from the English. It looked like they'd been frivolous. It looked like they'd been wasteful with some of the shots. They were going at an absolute clip, over 5 and over, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But in hindsight, maybe, as they always say, a pitch shouldn't be judged, nor should an innings, until both sides have batted on that deck. And a lot of people were saying England have been wasteful. A lot of Australian commentators on both Channel 7 and on Fox were starting to make those insinuations that the English had fallen apart. A lot of Australian fans were starting to send their messages around in their group chats talking, 5-0, what's going to happen here? The English may as well go home. There was pessimism running through the ranks, undoubtedly. Some nervy fans in the Barmy Army at Perth Stadium as well. Then the Aussies were called to bat. And first of all, the first calamity struck. Usman Khawaja had been off during the fielding innings for a significant period of time and didn't realise that the tail was going to crumble as it did for England. So because of that, after all of the question marks and the hypotheses and the theorising about who would partner with Usman to open the batting, well, the answer was no one. No one would partner with Usman to open the batting because he'd spent too long off the field. As we said, we're not sure. There was some stretching talk. There was some muscle tightness. There was also some issues maybe around having a stomach complaint. He went off a couple of times during the innings, so we haven't really had a lot of confirmation around that. But the one thing that we did know, he wasn't opening the batting. So it was Jake Weatherald and Marnus Labuschagne escalated to the top of the batting lineup after everything we've been through. Unfortunately for Jake Weatherald, his batting debut lasted just a couple of deliveries as he was unceremoniously knocked over, quite literally, by a rock from Jofra Archer, caught him pinned. The English reviewed, and Weatherald was on his way out from Archer for a duck on debut. A really disappointing debut, undoubtedly, for him, but this was absolutely just a great rock. There wasn't too much wrong with what he did. He just got cramped up and caught, and Archer bowled too good of a rock, and that's what can happen to you sometimes, unfortunately, I guess. Unfortunately, the rest of the Australian team didn't have the same sort of flattery. We thought after Mitchell Starc had claimed 7 for 58 off his just under 13 overs that the Aussies really had the upper hand. We also had Brendan Doggett, those 2 wickets on debut. But that first wicket was a sign of things to come. Unfortunately for the Aussies, they still didn't have enough time consumed, and Steve Smith had to come in and bat at number 3. And that meant that there was more pressure on. He was facing the new ball, which listed at number 4 originally, he wasn't going to be expecting, you wouldn't think. The Aussies, though, wasteful shots, poor decisions, and just some good bowling at points from a couple of the English, most notably, had them on the back foot. 5 Australian batters did get into double figures, including Mitchell Starc down at the tail, and memorably, he high batted in the first innings last year against India, which was just an absolute disaster, and was a very similar situation as we touched on. Alex Carey top scored to this point with 26 from 26, a runner ball. Cameron Green, a much more pedestrian, 24 from 50, but good to see him back with the bat, although he left a little bit wanting. Travis Head, 21 from 35, and then a poor shot selection saw him caught. Steve Smith, 17 from 49. Again, much more stoic, slower, more intentional, but still departed without making a real imprint. And that's the thing. A couple of the English did go on with their runs, as we touched on. Those scores of 30 plus 3 of them, realistically, the difference now, if you add another 10 to 20 runs to 2 or 3 of these Aussie batsmen, all of a sudden the deficit that sits, that we'll touch on in a moment, is probably down to single digits. And all of a sudden it's game on. But right now, England sit in the driver's seat. They've left the debutant, Brendan Doggett, yet to face a ball, and Nathan Lyon, a man who's not unfamiliar with having to reset after batting overnight, but normally in a night watchman's condition, not coming in at his usual batting position way down the order and then stepping in. So it is a really concerning position for the Aussies. But again, you don't judge a batting performance until both teams have batted on the pitch. And now we've seen both of them, and the English somewhat look to have the upper hand. I think you have to say Stokes was the star for the English bowling attack. The captain was decisive with his bowling. 5 wickets in 6 overs for 23 runs. Jofra Archer and Braden Carse both got 2 wickets. Archer, very tight, 2 for 11 from his 9 overs. Carse, the Aussies went after him a little bit more. A few loose balls, especially late in his last spell. 2 for 45 from his 10. As I touched on before, the English, they went about it with abandon. They scored at 5.23 and over. The Aussies a little more conservative until late in the innings when we started to get in the middle order and tail, who tried to counterpunch and attack. Just 3.15 and over. When you have a look at that situation, the English faced just under 33 overs for their 172 all out. Then you have a look at the Australian innings. They've now faced 39 overs for 123 runs. So quite a different tale. But we always thought that'd be the case with Bazball and what's associated with it. But as I said, the English appear to have the upper hand. The Aussies will need to dig in deep tomorrow morning. They trail by 49 runs as it stands. You would hope maybe that things will settle overnight a bit. Maybe Nathan Lyon and Brendan Doggett get some runs in the morning. Or is it actually better for the Aussies if it doesn't settle overnight? We lose that wicket, concede a first innings deficit, and just go after the English before the pitch starts to dry out. That's what we saw last year. It started to settle down, and that Indian second innings went very big. Do we want to possibly face that again? I don't think so. But again, it's a lot of coulda, woulda, what ifs. We don't know. So sometimes runs on the board is what counts. And I think that's where I'd rather see. If we can see this partnership, maybe just pick up another 20, 25, cut that deficit down into the 20s. As I said, a few of those other batters could have got us down to the point where we would have had a lead. All the pressure now sits on 2 guys who shouldn't have to shoulder the load in Brendan Doggett and Nathan Lyon. And I don't have a lot of expectation on them. They'll do their job and they'll be back out to bowl. and then we'll need more wickets. It's going to be interesting to see what the deck looks like on day 2 from the Perth Stadium. But the one thing that you can be sure of is that we'll be back after day 2. We'll have a late night record tomorrow night to wrap all the action from Perth Stadium, day 2, update you on where it all sits. But at the moment, the English, they've got the advantage. One thing is, it'd be hard pressed to see a draw coming from here. We're going to get a result. We could get a result in 3 days the way it's going, maybe even 2, who knows. But one thing's for sure, Test cricket is back. The Ashes are absolutely here. And there'll be ebbs, there'll be flows, there'll be pessimism, there'll be optimism, there'll be heartbreak. But you'll be able to keep up to date with it all by hitting subscribe down below or following along on our social media channels at The Chris Mack Show. You can find us on all your favourite social media platforms. But until tomorrow, a big thank you for tuning in to your home of the black and white of sports opinion. No greys here.